All right, we got Mike Rosenberg, aka Passenger, here, and wow, you got quite the story. So excited to jump into it. But where are you right now?
I'm in my place in Brighton, England, just in my little home studio.
All
And
right.
it's surprisingly okay weather actually for December in England. It's
Huh.
yeah, it's all right.
All right. Well, that's some good news across the pond. So you've had this incredible career already. That such a huge hit, Let Her Go. I mean, literally billions of streams on that song. I hear it all the time on the radio. You got a new record out called Patchwork, and a possible tour in 2021. All things going going well, hopefully, in the world for that to happen. But before we get into that, can you take us all the way back and just let us know how you got into music to begin with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it probably starts with I mean, it depends on how far back we're going here. I mean, as a kid, my mum and dad very kindly got me a classical guitar when I was sort of 7 or 8 years old, and I learned classical guitar from that age to about 15. And yeah, I'm so grateful to them because I think that really gave me the basis of and a great understanding of how the guitar works, and that's given me such a sort of great platform to go on and write the kind of music that I do. Um, I started writing my own songs when I was probably about 15 or 16, and they were absolutely terrible, as you can well imagine. Um,
Uh-huh.
but you know, like I loved it. I loved writing. I loved playing. I loved singing. And to be honest, as a 16-year-old, I didn't love an awful lot else. You know, like it's a tough time around then. I certainly wasn't
Yeah.
excelling academically. So
Uh-huh.
music was this thing that I felt like I was good at, which yeah, was really important at the time. And it since that age, I always sort of understood that that's what I wanted to do for a living, for sure.
When you say they got you a classical guitar, is that what you were playing at first? Were you having lessons to play classical music on the guitar?
Yeah, so like a nylon string guitar, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there were definitely moments in my adolescence where I really didn't feel like playing classical guitar. It's not what I listened to, not what I was particularly interested in, and there were definitely a handful of moments where I was very close to stopping. But my folks were really
Right.
really good with that, and they sort of understood the benefit of having that kind of classical training. Um, you know, they knew that that would put me in good stead for doing something musically later on in life. So yeah, I'm as I said, I'm super grateful to that time, really.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said you weren't too you weren't doing too great in school. I don't know how modest or not modest you're being, but classical guitar isn't easy. So obviously it wasn't for lack of intelligence or effort and other things. Did you feel like you liked guitar enough to that you could actually pursue that type of music, at least for that time and at that point in time?
Yeah, for sure. And I think I don't know. I feel like as a 15-year-old boy, school isn't necessarily where your head's at. Do you know what I mean? I think it's a
Sure.
confusing,
Right.
yeah, a confusing time, and yeah, couldn't really find the motivation for it. And I think as soon as I decided that I wanted to be a musician and to write songs, that it was kind of like my get out card. I was like, I don't need this school stuff anyway. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and be a rock star, so it's all fine. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I ended up dropping out of school at 17, um, and just started, trying to pick up gigs here and there wherever I could. And I worked in, I had a load of different side jobs. I worked in kitchens for a long time. I worked on building sites, which was short lived because I haven't really got the physique for it. Um, and
Uh-huh.
yeah, I just did a bunch of different jobs whilst trying to kind of progress music in some kind of way. Yeah.
So you drop out of school, so that's a big decision. You're kind of all in on the music thing, and do you, and so and so while you're working, you're doing these smaller gigs. Do you remember any moments where you felt like your commitment to music was actually starting to pay off?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, in the early days, you're just happy to play anywhere, anytime, to anyone. And so for the first few years, I was just, you know, delighted. You know, I used to play in restaurants for like 3 hours, and I'd get like $70 for it. You know, and I didn't care. It was just
Right.
great to be playing, and an amazing feeling. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, things
And was
actually.
this you by yourself? This was you by yourself playing in not with a band, just solo guitar.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. Certainly in the early days, and actually things happen quite quickly. One of my dad's friends is a cameraman, and he'd been working on a project called One Giant Leap, which was like a world music project. And he introduced me to a couple of those guys, and in turn, they introduced me to IE Music, who have managed me since I was 17. So things actually progressed very quickly, very early on, and then it started to kind of slow down a little bit and get a little bit more challenging, I think.
Yeah. So I mean, 3 hours is a long set for one guy on an acoustic guitar. Were these all original songs that you were playing? Were you playing some cover songs? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of covers. I mean, I think when you're playing in a restaurant to people eating on a Sunday night, like people just want like Van Morrison and that kind of thing, which is cool. And it, yeah,
Right.
I think every musician needs to go through something like that, you know, just to, you only get good from playing. Like there's no shortcut. Like you have to just put in the hours. So looking back on it, you know, it was exhausting, and obviously the money was pretty terrible. But looking back on it, I think it was a fantastic thing to do, just to kind of, yeah, just get my chops up, get my confidence up, and get used to playing in front of people, however small the crowd used to be, you know.
Right. So playing along, you said that a couple of the right people saw you, and you happen to know a couple people to help you along the way. Tell us a little bit about the transition from playing 3 hour sets by yourself in a restaurant to maybe some venues and and having a few more people in them.
Yeah, I mean, it took a long time for that to happen, really. You know, once I started getting managed, you know, it was quite a, yeah, it was a process. I ended up meeting a guy called Andrew Phillips, who I ended up sort of writing with and later forming a band with. And we worked on music for a good sort of, I'd imagine a good 5 years together. We put the first record out as Passenger, the band, in 2007. So that was a really steep learning curve for me, you know, both with writing, and it was my first experience of the music industry. It was also a very strange time to be entering the music industry because the kind of physical sales side of things was starting to shake. You know, it was around the time of like LimeWire and all of that kind of illegal downloading, before Spotify, before they kind of figured out how to do it. So all of a sudden you were
Right.
kind of entering into this industry where there was this kind of low level panic around the whole thing because nobody knew how it was going to work. You know, we were coming out of the golden era where people were selling 30 million records and CDs were costing like $25 or whatever it was. You know, it was insane. And
Yeah.
when I was coming into it, it was just around the time of people being like, this isn't sustainable. This isn't going to work for very much longer.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely a difficult time to come into it. And I think part of the reason that first record didn't quite do what it could have done is to do with the timing of it, for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because for someone who's all in, you know, dropped out of school, this is what I'm gonna do, and then to suddenly to notice that the music industry might not really know where it's going, and and then how am I gonna make money when everyone's just downloading music off LimeWire and Kazaa or
Yeah.
Napster before that, but yeah, that was a few years before that. So you think you think that might have contributed to the first album not doing as well as it might have. So after that, as the years progress, the music industry, or at least people outside of the music industry, start to figure out, how to make this work. And we have legal streaming like we do now. So how did things start to, did you see a difference in the album after that?
Yeah. So, I mean, that whole period of time was looking back on it, it was really challenging. I think it wasn't right for many reasons. Quite a lot to do with the fact that I was so young and I didn't really have such a strong vision for what I was trying to do. Like I had no idea, actually. I was, some 20-year-old kid, like writing songs and trying to get it right. And, when we play gigs, like some of them would be great, some of them wouldn't. Like, consistency is a really big issue, I think, when you're first starting out. You haven't got your stagecraft honed yet, and it's as I said, a really steep learning curve. And I think for many reasons, that time, the album didn't do as well as it could have done. The band ended up breaking up shortly after the record came out, and my manager left, and I got a new manager in, and it was just a really sort of like, a sort of turbulent time. I also sort of broke up with a girlfriend, and I ended up moving back to my mom and dad's house, which was kind of depressing. And at that point in time, I remember that was like touch and go whether I was going to do this anymore. Like, part of me was just kind of saying, well, you gave it a go for 5 years, like you released an album. Maybe this is it,
Uh-huh. It's interesting because that huge hit Let Her Go happened in what was it, 2013-ish? You put that album out, but your first album was in 2007, right? Was it around 2007?
That's right.
So I mean, that's a good 6-7 years there, that you persisted from that first album, which you felt like it didn't do too well, and you're going through all these things, breakups and doubting. What do you think helped carry you from that first album that did do so great, and you're going through these tougher times, all the way to that record in 2013?
Yeah, well, so I, ended up in my mum and dad's place, and I remember feeling pretty rough about life in general. And I remember just kind of sitting at the kitchen table and smoking and drinking and writing for a good 2 or 3 months. My mum and dad actually went on like a trip. They went on this big trip, so I was just in the house on my own, and it was a rough time. But actually, what came out of that was this really beautiful little record, which ended up being my second album, called Wide Eyes Blind Love. And it's a very, to listen to it, I think we recorded it in 5 days or something like that. Like, it was super lo-fi, super rushed. Like, I didn't have any money to pay for the studio. It was all kind of favors from people. And but there's something really, really honest and really direct about that record. I think it was a very raw time in my life, and I still love a lot of those songs. And the real turning point was, actually, I went and supported an Australian artist in Australia, a guy called Lior. I think that was in about 2008. And it was the first time I played solo for years, since the restaurant gigs. And I was very underconfident. I didn't know how to play without a band. I didn't know what I was doing, really. And I just kind of played some of these shows, and the reaction was just incredible. I was just playing songs, and people were really connecting with it. And I remember it just giving me this unbelievable sort of wave of confidence of like, actually, this works. Like, really boiling this down to the most simple form, just a guitar and vocal, and these songs that I've just written, which they are really honest. There's no bullshit. There's nothing in the way of these songs, between the songs and the audience. So I came back from Australia and felt really inspired again. And that's actually when I started busking, I think. So yeah, you asked about the gap between 2007 and 2013. Basically, that's busking. That was like playing on the street. I started traveling around the UK, playing on street corners and just little pub gigs. And I was just on my own. I was just, staying in youth hostels, traveling on the train. And it was a brilliant, amazing summer. It was such an adventure, such a sense of freedom. And actually, like some days I'd do really well. I'd sell a load of CDs. I'd feel great because, 100 or so people were walking away with a CD and had discovered my music. And over that 7-year period, it just built steadily and slowly. Year on year, I would go back to the same towns. I'd play on the same street corners. I'd play in the same pubs. And year on year, the crowds would get bigger. And I was able to fund everything myself because I was, my overheads were very minimal. It was just one guy on the road paying £14 a night to sleep somewhere and have a sandwich. And the rest of it was money that I could put back into the project for recording, for promo, for whatever it was. So yeah, honestly, that's the story. Like I for 5, 6, 7 years, whatever it was, just went and played and played and played and played. Yeah.
That's what's so cool, I think, about being a kind of a one-person artist who can just be you. If you have an acoustic guitar, you have a concert. You know what I mean? And that's. It kind of makes me a little sad that I feel, like computers don't even come with CD players anymore. You know what I mean? And it's that you had something that tangible that you could sell there.
For sure.
It makes me wonder what buskers are doing now. Are they passing out I think there's digital links, those codes you could take a picture of. It might send you to maybe a digital, Spotify profile or something like that. I guess those are some solutions for the modern day, but it's hard to pay someone for that. You know what I mean? You're fortunate that you had something tangible to sell and at least fund you a little bit along the way, right?
That's so true, man. I say that all the time. I think my window in busking was incredibly fortunate. Firstly, I think the world has sort of clamped down on busking quite a lot. It's not as easy to busk nowadays. I think for security reasons and everything else, let alone COVID, but over the last few years, it's not easy to busk anymore. Whereas I think, back in when I was doing it, it was a lot easier. But you're right. I think the fact that I could sell CDs and people were still buying them and playing them, and it was, a worthwhile thing to have, was massive. Not only that, I think Facebook proved to be an incredibly important tool for me because back in those days, it was certainly the social media platform. It's way before Instagram really took hold, or even Twitter to a certain extent. And the great thing was that, every time you posted on Facebook, every single person who followed you would see that post. That's not the case anymore. I think we have 3.5 million people on Facebook, and we post something and like 6,000 see it, so the algorithms and everything has changed so much. Back in the day, I'd post something and everyone would see it. So I was able to build.
It was just sequential. It was based off when you posted it.
That's right. And so that tool was incredibly important. I think the combination of Facebook and CDs, as you said, were instrumental in allowing that entire project to work. Yeah,
it's what inspired you to busk? Did you see maybe a couple other artists doing it and you're like, hey, I could do that? Or, especially since I just have one guitar and me, and I can just jump on the street and start playing. Were there some people who inspired you to do that? Did it come out of necessity? Like, hey, I'm not booking as many gigs as I'd like to play, so I'm just going to jump on the street and see what happens as well. Was it a little bit of both?
Yeah, I mean, I dipped my toe into busking previously. Like, I remember going out when I was like 15 and just busking with a guitar, no amplifier, no nothing, and just because I had no money to buy my family Christmas presents, so I was just like, shit, I need to do something. And I remember making like an okay amount of money. I was like, this is, even for a 15-year-old, I was like, wow, this is cool. I think when I got to the stage, I was, as I said, living at my parents' house. I had no money at all. I had no prospects. I had no leads as far as like, oh, it's okay because this label are interested, or, I'm having a meeting with it. I had nothing going on. And so I was like, what can I do? What is actually open to me? What, like objectively, what is possible at this stage to get my music to people, and it just seemed to be the obvious choice. It's like, well, just go and stand there and play your songs and see who listens. It's
Yeah.
again, and I think this is a theme throughout my career. Like, you take all the bullshit away, you stop over complicating it, you stop overthinking it, boil it down to the most simplistic form of what you can do, and it generally works.
Yeah, I mean, I think psychologically that must have a good effect on you too, as a 15-year-old, to need money, and you go out on the street with your guitar
Yep.
and you play,
Yep.
and you get money for what you needed. And
Yeah.
I think I feel like that's a great that must have a great psychological effect on a kid, as far as believing that, hey, this is something that can be a living.
For sure, man, for sure. And it was, what I really loved about being a busker as well was you're a real underdog, and people don't. It kind of reminds me of Usual Suspects, when Kevin Spacey sort of walks out the interview room and then he starts walking normally. It's like everybody underestimated that guy. And I'm not saying that I murdered anyone, but
Yeah.
but there was an element of, when you're a busker, it's just like, I don't know, like, actually I was making an okay living, and I was doing all right, and I was growing my brand, and it was feeling really good. But I quite like the fact that everybody underestimated me as a busker. It was kind of a good feeling in a weird way. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you didn't murder anyone, but you killed the music game.
There you go.
So
There you go.
I
Nice.
I tell us a little bit about, because I wish we could talk all day, and just because it sounds, I'd love to hear some of your more busking stories, and maybe a little bit more stories about your approach to your biggest hit. But why don't you tell us a little bit about Let Her Go? How that came about, and the reception of it, which was just epic, is doesn't even describe it.
Yeah, it's mad. It's completely mad. Like, when I wrote that song, I was on a rural tour of Australia. I was in a place called Newcastle, New South Wales. It's about 2 hours north of Sydney. And I was playing this beautiful little restaurant with a couple of friends, but like, 70 people, I think we played to that night. And I remember writing that song backstage in literally in 45 minutes. Like, it just fell out of my brain. And quite often when I write songs quickly like that, there's something about them, they're not overthought. They come out very naturally. There's usually something very sort of direct about them. And I knew that riff was special, and the lyrics and the sort of like the juxtaposition of the lines was something special. But of course, I had no idea. As I said, I then went out to play to 70 people. Like, at that moment, you don't think you're going to have a global mega hit on your hands. But yeah, the big thing with that song was I started touring with Ed Sheeran, I think the following year, just after that album had come out. And the difference suddenly between playing like on the street and to a few people every evening, suddenly I was playing to like 5,000 people a night. And, momentum online started to really build and grow, and I could feel it starting to snowball. And I think Let Her Go was it was the right song at the right time. Like, the wave was building behind me. And then I had this song that could kind of work on radio, and it could kind of, it was a good example of what I did. So yeah, it's so mad to talk about. One of the craziest stories, which I have to tell you about this, is so everything was building, as I said, with Ed and whatever. And I got this weird email completely out of the blue. And it was from a guy called Dave in the Netherlands. He was like, "Hey, Mike, I just wanted to touch base. I was in a cafe the other day in Amsterdam, and Let Her Go came on. And I'd never heard it before, so I Shazammed it. And I found out it's you. I've got your email, and I'm actually a radio plugger here in the Netherlands. Would it be okay if I took this into radio and just sort of saw, if there was any reaction?" And I remember reading this email with my manager, just kind of being like, who knows who Dave is? Like, this could be some kind of scam. Like,
Yeah.
who knows? But we're just like, what have we got to lose? So, 2-line email back
Yeah.
saying like, Dave, knock yourself out, man. Like, go and do your worst. And
Uh-huh.
2 weeks later, it was #1 in Holland. And that's how the whole thing started. It then went to Belgium and Germany and Switzerland, Austria, up to Scandinavia. It started sort of dominoing around Europe. And then weirdly, Australia, New Zealand, then the UK finally got on board. And then fortunately, we had that amazing Budweiser Super Bowl advert in the States, which kind of blew things up over there. So if it hadn't have been for Dave Shazamming in that moment, if he had decided to go for a coffee somewhere else that day, it's a bit of a sliding doors moment. And
Yeah.
I think behind
Wow.
any crazy story like this, there are a number of moments like that you just think, well, if that hadn't happened, who knows if any of it would have done,
Yeah, that crazy butterfly effect.
Sure.
I imagine, I think you still would have had some amount of large success. Like you said, you were already on your way. You're opening for Ed Sheeran is no small thing in itself.
Sure.
So you were already playing to thousands of people. Uh, yeah, that's crazy. Well, props to Dave, and props for him to reaching out to you and taking the initiative. Did you guys was he like, because it sounds like the way that you tell the story is he's like, hey, I'm gonna kind of see what this could do, and then if it looks like it's gonna do well, did he then follow up and say, hey, this can do well, I'm getting good
Yeah,
feedback,
of
so
course.
do you want me
Yeah.
to proceed? Do you want I can proceed with this? I'm assuming you got compensated him for his time, so but I assume you wouldn't want to compensate him at the outset because you're like, who's Dave? But
That's
is that
right.
what
And
happened? Did he say, I kind of shop this around and I'm getting good feedback, so this could really blow if you guys let me, send it out?
yeah, exactly. And I think it was, a bit of a gamble on his part. He certainly there was no expectation of payment early on. And I think as soon as it started to sort of move, then obviously we opened up a dialogue with him and sort of looked after him in that sense. But yeah, it's
That's an insane timeline, though. 2 weeks later, it's like blowing
literally
up. I mean, that's amazing.
it
Well,
was it was
it's
a very
I gotta
strange
say,
thing.
I'm sure you hear it all the time. I hear it on the radio still. I live in Los Angeles all the time still. You flick on the radio and they're still playing it, and it's a beautiful song. It's one of the you wrote a beautiful timeless song. And it went. I think I read it went #1 in 19 countries. On Spotify, it literally has not millions but billions of plays. On YouTube, it's got billions of plays.
Mm.
uh, how's that feel to have that type of reach, to be touching that many people with your music?
Totally mad if I stop and think about it. I mean, I think when it was all happening, it was otherworldly. It's the strange thing is, like, as a kid, like, understanding that you wanted to be a musician, you sort of dream of this kind of stuff. And as an 8-year-old, you're unaware of how unlikely it may be. You think, yeah, I'm gonna smash this. And then you drop out of school, you try and be a musician for a while, and you're like, this is really, really difficult. And of course, it's not going to happen like that. Like, hopefully I can make a living. Hopefully I can play in front of a few people, and a handful of people really enjoy this. But you very quickly understand that is a total fairy tale. So then for it to actually happen again is such a mind blow, because it's like you're living in some sort of Hollywood movie. It's completely ridiculous. And all of these kind of
Right. Right.
labels and various people that have kind of rejected you along the way are now sort of like your best mate, and all of this kind of stuff's happening. It's a very strange time.
Uh-huh.
I mean, now I'm just really proud of it. I'm really proud that I wrote a song, as you say, like that has stood the test of time and will hopefully sort of go on for years more. And the fact that really, as a songwriter, all you're trying to do is help. Is say something within your songs that is going to connect with as many people as possible and is actually going to mean something to people. So the fact that I was able to do that once in such a sort of profound way it's something to be really proud of, I think.
Yeah, and people who hear that song on the radio might have been like, "Oh, who's Passenger, great new artist, what a shooting star kind of, story. But, like we said, you were working at this for at least in that one particular project for 7 years already, so, people see when you finally make it, and it seems new to
Totally.
them. Like it seems like a Hollywood story to them. But you had been working for a long time prior to that, and you've been consistent with your output, so much so that you can tell that you're really working hard at this. And you've because it's not just Let Her Go. You have many songs that just have millions of streams, and so you've kind of cultivated this fandom now. And this year alone you came out with Patchwork and Remember to Forget. Tell us a little bit about those new projects.
Yeah, so I've got a new album coming out in January, which is called Songs for the Drunk and Brokenhearted, which is really
Mm-hmm.
exciting. It was meant to come out in May, but we ended up holding it back just because of the pandemic and the fact that it just felt like a real shame to release an album during that time with so little that we could sort of do around it. We couldn't go busking, we couldn't do any gigs, we couldn't do any promos. Just like this is a real shame to have put so much work in. And just kind of punt this album out into the universe. So held that back. I then ended up writing a bunch of new songs in lockdown, which is Patchwork, which is what you're talking about. So I wrote all of these songs within like 6 weeks, 2 months. I then recorded it here in my home studio, and we just released it digitally, and all of the money is going to a food bank charity here in the UK called the Trussell Trust. So that was a really nice thing to do.
Wow.
During lockdown. It kind of felt like a really productive and positive way of using that time.
Sure,
And
definitely.
then, so yeah, we're now back into sort of Drunk and Brokenhearted. I added a few new songs,
Uh-huh.
took a few off, and that now is ready to come out in January, which I'm really excited about, man. I think it's really benefited from that extra time and those extra songs. Yeah.
Yeah, so you had this record, you thought it was done. COVID happens, so it gives you a little extra time to think about it, and then you're kind of like, well, maybe it's not done after thinking. Uh, I think a lot of artists could, I think a lot of projects could never be done if artists
For
had their
sure.
way, and if it didn't have time limits. But it sounds like this temporary suspension of its release kind of did some work, and you actually made some genuine changes to it, right? You took a few songs off and you added a few songs in, right?
Yeah, I think it's a fine line. I think you don't want to rush a project, and you don't want to take a decade over it. Like there is something in
Right.
between where there's a sweet spot. I think, as I told you before, when I was busking, studio time was such a premium. Like I didn't have the money, I didn't have the time to kind of faff about in the studio for 6 months. Like it was kind of get in, record your songs, make it as beautiful as you can in 2 weeks, and then get out again. And I think I haven't really updated that sort of model. And my attitude, because I write so much, my attitude has always been that it's like, write the songs, record the songs, tour the songs, and repeat. And I think this kind of broke the chain a little bit. And it was like, hang on a minute, like I don't need to work like this. Like I love working quickly. I love kind of, keeping things flowing and moving, but just having that extra couple of months to not only the addition of the new songs, but to come back to the record and be like, actually, you know what? I can do that vocal better. And I think that guitar could be better. And, we ended up tinkering with a few little bits, and it's a lesson that I hope I can sort of learn from and take into the future, because I think it really benefited from that extra couple of months for sure.
Yeah, just taking a beat and coming back to it. And if there were ever time to do that, I mean, 2020, by all means,
It was
take
kind
a
of
few more
forced.
months.
It was kind of forced on everyone, wasn't it? So yeah, it was a happy accident for sure.
And assuming everything goes great and we continue to progress against this pandemic, will we be seeing you on the road in 2021?
That is the idea. Yes, I'm hoping we'll be able to do some summer festivals in Europe over June and July, and then the headline tour is booked to kick off end of August, and we'll be in North America, I think in the fall. So kind of October, November time. So yeah, all of my dates are up on my website and, you know, Instagram and all those lovely places. But yeah, man, you know, I can't wait. You know, if this pandemic has done one thing, I think for all of us, it's to put the value back into live music, not just for performers, but for people who just go and listen. Like, I think everybody suddenly understands just how important this is to all of us, you know.
100%. I've said the same thing. You know, I've talked to, you know, a lot of artists this year, and that's something I said myself. It was a lot of times we think of the arts or entertainment or music, live music, as supplemental to your life, you know. But I think if 2020 has shown me anything, it's like, wow, it's a key part of my life. It's
Really,
maybe my favorite things to do outside the house. You know, if I'm gonna leave the house to do something one night, it's I wish it could be live music. You know, so it as a musician, it really, I think, helps you know how you're doing something of value. You know, you're contributing something valuable to the culture and to the world.
yeah, I hope so. I think music is about as magic as we get on planet Earth. Do you know what I mean? Especially live music, it's as close to magic as we have. So you take that magic away from people's lives, and it's obviously going to have an effect for sure.
That's very well put. I couldn't agree more. Mike, it's been such an honor to talk to you and hear your story. So entertaining hearing the journey from playing to a couple people in a restaurant to billions of fans listening to you. We like to end the interview by asking if you had one piece of advice for aspiring artists. What would it be?
I think it took me a really long time to figure out how hard I needed to work. I think there's kind of something in me just thinking, well, I'm talented and that's enough. And it never is. You have to work really, really, really hard, really hard. And as the earlier you can understand that, the better. I think I'm going to give you two bits of advice, if that's all right. That's the first one. The second
Please
one,
do. Yeah.
don't try and sound like anybody else. I think I spent a lot of my first few years trying to sound like Paul Simon, and it was a complete disaster. There's already a Paul Simon, and he's very good. Nobody
Yeah.
needed an 18-year-old version of him. And I think as soon as I started to find my real voice, like actually what I was trying to say and a way of saying it, that's when it started getting exciting, and that's when people start believing it. So those two would be the two big ones for me.
Yeah, I mean, no one could sound like Passenger better than Passenger, right?
Well,
And no
I
one could
hope
sound
not.
like Paul Simon
Maybe
better
there's
than.
some like evil doppelganger out there somewhere, but yeah, you know, like it's great to be influenced by people, of course, like we all are. Like Paul Simon's a massive influence on me, but there's a difference between, you know, tipping the hat towards Paul Simon and just kind of basically stealing what he's doing, you know. So yeah,
Totally.
it's a fine line, and you have to find that for yourself, I think.
100%. I was working at a recording studio for a while, and I remember, I feel like a lot of artists probably think this when you hear a record or you hear a production style or you hear something and you think, oh well, there must be some studio magic that I just, you know, I can't afford or I can't
Yeah,
do. And
yeah,
working in that recording studio with the producer, I learned that a lot of the things that sounded really cool or that I thought were
yeah,
really excellent as far as production goes really was just the hard work that he was putting into it. It was just
yeah.
it was just him literally taking the time to do these things. So there wasn't some secret trick. There wasn't some secret plugin that he was using that I didn't know of or couldn't afford. It was just hard work. And so it's 100% true that so great advice, Mike. Bringing it backward.